Greenwald actually just had a recent interview on Rising talking about censorship in reference to the Palestine-Israel conflict, right? So there are certain censorship things that are happening. And I mentioned that France was one of the countries that they're trying to ban pro-Palestinian protests. So they're one of the countries doing that. Although, I told you before, the French don't really listen to Macron like that. They still do their own thing. But Glenn Greenwald was very vocal about this on Rising. So I want to go ahead and get into that clip here.
Course, comes after France banned all pro-Palestinian protests in the country. And journalist Glenn Greenwald joins us now to weigh in. Glenn, we are so happy to have you back with us. Thank you for being here and, talk to us about these threats we're seeing to free speech and civil protest all over the globe, but in Western countries, that reminds me and probably reminds you of how readily and easily civil liberties were abandoned in the U.S. as a response to what happened on 9/11.
Yeah, I think that's exactly the right framework. Obviously, after 9/11, most Americans, I know I was included among them, I lived in Manhattan at the time, felt a sense of great rage over the attacks that had been perpetrated that killed 3,000 American civilians. Most decent people, by definition, felt similarly about the attacks that Hamas carried out in Israel on Saturday. And yet the lesson that I thought we had learned from 9/11 is that when we follow our rage and we allow the government to claim authoritarian powers, enact the Patriot Act days later because everybody's so angry and they can exploit that, we end up going down paths that we find at best counterproductive and in many ways shameful. I think the key here, Robbie, is that the EU, these EU governments, Germany, France, have taken a position in this war. They are on the side of Israel. They have made that abundantly clear. And note that they're not banning all protests regarding this war. They're only banning protests that are either critical of Israel or pro-Palestinian, meaning protests that are a deviation from their policies. You're still free to have pro-Israel protests. You're allowed to call for the destruction of Gaza. What you're not allowed to do are have the kind of protests where you express views that dissent from government policy. And that's what I think makes it so alarming.
Glenn, that part is really important. I think what Glenn was saying right there, like I said, again, if your narrative is similar to the narrative that mainstream media has, if your narrative is similar to the narrative that CNN, MSNBC, and Fox News have in reference to this conflict with Israel and Palestine, and also in reference to Russia and Ukraine as well, you'll be all right. You'll be all right. But the moment you start to, and it's really interesting, I have to say this in 2023, but the moment you start to look out for those that are oppressed, with the Palestinian people are the ones that are oppressed, you're seen as problematic. So a lot of people that have been speaking from that perspective have been smeared. We've been called all different types of names. People are saying that we're like pro-Hamas or whatever and all this kind of stuff, and that we're cheering on what they did, etc. The thing is this: when people are oppressed, and the people who are oppressing them are actually, in this particular case, the state of Israel is the one who is oppressing the Palestinian people. You have to remember, the oppressor has all the resources. They have all the power. So what are the oppressed supposed to do? Especially when they're still getting attacked, even if they're following all the rules. So what you see happening right now with a country like France choosing to, we're going to ban these types of protests, get ready for it, because it's going to be other countries that take heed to this as well and say, you can't do this type of protest, even if it's a peaceful protest. And I argued years ago that the protest can only be peaceful. I argued even back then, they didn't want people protesting at all. They don't want people in the streets at all. So that's really what it is about. Let's continue.
You've also been tracking some, I loathe to talk about hypocrisy, but some backtracking that some prominent critics of these kind of speech overreaches have been doing in the wake of this particular conflict. People like you, I will say my co-host here, and Michael Schellenberger have been very consistent on these issues, but not everyone has been the same way. Who, in your view, have been sort of the biggest offenders here?
Well, it's just so interesting because over the last 4 to 5 years, censorship has become a primary weapon of the neoliberal elites or the American liberal left. The kind of entire Democratic Party has defended things like the U.S. security state pressuring big tech to censor on COVID, on Ukraine, on Russiagate, and now in this war, and conservatives have been almost unanimously united against this sort of thing, which is why I found myself in alignment with them on these issues. And I have a lot of experience arguing with left liberals who defend these censorship policies, invoking the rationale that you guys started off the segment by detailing, the ones that I outlined. And now I find myself seeing conservatives overtly cheering, not just the censorship that they have been so loudly opposing over the last few years, but the theories invoked to justify that censorship. One in particular is Dave Rubin, who basically really built his platform, his entire platform, in opposition to things like cancel culture and censorship. Yep. And he went in response to this news that France imposed a nationwide ban on all Palestinian protests and said, oh, maybe there's a chance for the West after all. As though, I guess now the way to save the West is by empowering neoliberal officials in France to ban political speech that they disagree with. And this is...
Let's pause here for just a second. Isn't it interesting how some of the people that were very much against cancel culture a couple of years ago are now pro cancel culture? Like now they're like people like Dave Rubin. Like, it's really weird. It's funny how it's not cancel culture when it's an issue that affects them directly or is an issue that they're really passionate about. All of a sudden it's okay to cancel people. But when it's an issue that did not affect them and that they were not passionate about, it was not okay to cancel people. So which is it? Either you're for cancel culture or you're against cancel culture. You don't get to do this. Yay, I agree with cancel culture when it's an issue that, I disagree with. That's not how this works. So you see what's happening when it comes to this particular issue, this conflict with Israel and Palestine. We're starting to see people's true colors. We're starting to see people like shift and kind of, move in different ways because it's an issue that is close to them.
Something you're seeing throughout the American right, not all, by no means all, but a lot of people who typically mock cancel culture, mock the call for free speech, for censorship, now suddenly not just approving of it, but demanding it.
Yeah, that's a great example. A more good examples, I thought, was the overreaction to the statements put out by the Harvard students, solely blaming Israel for what has happened. I criticized that statement. It's gotten a lot of criticism from people on the right, and I think it was fair to call those students out. Of course, that is free speech as well. But then there was an entire we're gonna blast their names all over everywhere. We're gonna make sure they can never get a job, anything of that sort. And then there's been a split on the right and whether that's the right approach. Megyn Kelly saying we should do that. Candace Owens and Vivek Ramaswamy saying, okay, wait a minute, isn't this the very cancel culture we decry? I feel similarly to you that there's so much hypocrisy on the kind of cancel culture ethos of free speech environment, and then certainly on the policies of free speech. These European governments, we cannot allow in the U.S. this kind of thing to take hold. I think our First Amendment prohibits it technically, but we've seen all the ways American government bureaucrats have used to get around the very hard protections, firm protections of the First Amendment.
Whether you agree with the protests or not. And this part is very key. And I said this about the trucker convoy. I said, listen, you don't have to agree with what they're protesting over. But if you start saying, no, they shouldn't be able to do it, then it's going to become a domino effect. And that's going to affect other protests as well, where other people are going to be like, they're going to be affected. Even some of the issues that you do agree with can also be affected. So I think it's important that we stress that part because, like I said, you don't want it. Perfect example, when Trump was removed from Twitter, there were a lot of people cheering, really excited on the left. But then the left started to face censorship too. There were people that got demonetized on YouTube that same year. Actually, I think it was the same month. There were people that were deplatformed, etc. So the point that I'm trying to make is be careful who you wish that upon because you don't want that to happen to you.
I think those are excellent examples. One that really bothered me in particular, because it's not just a pundit, but a fairly high-ranking government official, was Josh Hawley, who, like most conservatives or from that wing of the Republican Party, have been calling for things like defund the FBI, or at least insisting that they be investigated for the politicization of their powers. And Josh Hawley went and said, I want the FBI to investigate people who are signing petitions that he thinks go over the line. In other words, calling for the FBI to do things like COINTELPRO and the kinds of things that gave it such a bad name in the 60s and 70s, and now again during the Trump era, meaning not investigating crimes, but investigating people who have the wrong ideology. And I think the cancel culture thing on some level is also disturbing, though not as bad as when state officials do it. But you're exactly right, Robbie. I mean, I thought the whole point was, the leftists who want to get people fired really do believe those views are dangerous. They really believe those views incite violence against minorities. They feel just as strongly as people on the right who think that pro-Hamas statements should be made illegal or criticism of Israel should be made illegal. You either believe in the principle or you don't.
That's you got to be careful. You got to be careful with it.
I wonder if you had any insight on this story that's been going around about 3 MSNBC Arab hosts being taken off the air. Of course, we both used to work with Mehdi Hassan at The Intercept. They seem not to have made any statements denying the veracity of the claim they were taken off the air. But MSNBC has pushed back, saying that Ali Velshi was traveling and that was the cause of him not doing his nightly show. People have wondered if Mehdi Hassan would make a statement. It doesn't seem like he has been willing to do so far, one way or another. And some people have taken that silence, his failure to reject the idea that he was intentionally pulled off, as speaking volumes. Do you have any insight there?
I think he's been the best journalist at MSNBC, and he has been incredibly insightful and a lot of his commentary, brave as well. He went on the air right away when the climate was very kind of repressive, and he's one of the 3 who has reportedly been taken off the air. So I've spoken to some people in MSNBC, and I think the point you're making is exactly right, Bree. If I were the subject of news reports saying I had been censored by my corporate employer and it wasn't true, I, of course, would run forward to say this is not true. I wouldn't want people thinking I had been censored and I just swallowed it silently, because it's devastating to your credibility if that's true. If it is true, I would think it is even more disturbing that they are standing by silently and allowing it to happen without objecting. It is true these people have been on the air. They've been part of panels. They've been doing some reporting. The issue, though, is have they been removed from their hosting positions? They all have their own shows, either on the weekend or on streaming services. And it seems as though it is true that the shows they host, that they typically anchor, have not been airing. And I agree with you completely. They have the obligation as journalists to stand up and either say, yes, these reports are true, or they're not. And the fact that they're silent, I think, makes it even more alarming.
I just want to add, for those who are not aware, Mehdi Hassan and there were 2 other Muslim journalists that were part of MSNBC. It has been brought to people's attention that they have not been hosting their shows since this conflict with Israel and Palestine started. So their shows have just been off the air. Now, MSNBC has made the claim that they were on vacation or something like that. And I just thought to myself, really? All 3 of them at the same time? It's something like that. And they're not saying anything. Mehdi Hassan has not spoken out about it. The other guys, I can't remember their names, but the other ones, they haven't really, said it. So I think, again, this is another example of mainstream media trying to silence people. But this time it seems like they're trying to silence their own commentators that have their own shows on the network. So again, going back to the censorship, whether you agree with what is said or not, that does not give you the right or the authority to tell that person that they're not allowed to speak. And this is where I think we have to be very careful. There are many people that have come onto the show that I disagree with. There are stories that I cover on the show where it's a politician that's speaking about something, but I disagree with what he's saying. But I think it's important that we don't tell people that they're not allowed to speak, because this does spread. It's not just going to happen to people on the right. It's not just going to happen to people on the left. It's going to happen to people across the board, especially if you don't fit with the status quo narrative.
I wanted to get your take on another issue. I'm hearing a lot of mainstream reporters, the Ben Collins of the world from NBC, claiming misinformation has never been more out of control on social media on X than it is now. Even though I'm seeing, I remember a lot of erroneous fog of war reports, during other violent events, during shootings, during bombings, during natural disasters. They're saying it's the worst it's ever been. Although, I'm seeing community notes, which I think is a really actually good feature on X, correcting in some cases, extremely quickly some of the bad information that's spreading. So, how do you respond?
I just wanted to pause, Robbie, there and just explain community notes for those of you who are not on Twitter. So now there's this feature where if you tweet something that may not be true or it may be problematic, community notes just pops underneath your tweet and will like either correct you or tell your audience that either something that you said is not true, or they'll give them more context about what you're saying. Some people kind of look at community notes as a snitch. Some people, community notes called out Cenk Uygur when he announced he was running for president, and they said that legally he can't be president because he was born in Istanbul, Turkey. So community notes does things like that.
On to how social media and how mainstream media is handling what's going on right now.
So 2 points. I mean, this is historical revisionism. You know, they're trying to say that ever since Elon Musk took over Twitter and got rid of content moderators, which is a euphemism for censors, that now there's this sudden flow explosion of disinformation. Anyone with a memory that's functioning very well recalls that these same media outlets were complaining about Facebook, Google, and Twitter prior to Elon Musk in the Jack Dorsey era, allowing way too much disinformation. They've always wanted more censorship, Robbie. They've always claimed that not censoring enough spawns disinformation. And I think the key thing with this term disinformation is who gets to decide what is disinformation. People like Ben Collins were the ones spreading the CIA conspiracy theories about Trump being subject to blackmail by Vladimir Putin because he had sex tapes he was holding over his head, or lying that the Hunter Biden laptop was Russian disinformation. These people are the least qualified people to decree what is and is not disinformation. And I think you're right. Letting the market decide, the kind of marketplace of ideas, either through community notes or responding, is by far a more effective way than trying to empower centralized authority to decree what is true and what is false, which is easily abused, and no one is competent to do that.
Thank you so much for weighing in on this, and people should continue to follow your coverage of it over on your show. Glenn, it's always such a pleasure.
Great.
All right, and there goes Glenn. So, what's up? Say hello to Rome, you guys. I love y'all so freaking much. We love you too, Rome. What's up? What's up? Yeah, community notes is a trip because, if you're not really trying to snitch on yourself, community notes will snitch on you for you.